Hello, and welcome to the Scale, Fix, Deliver podcast, a podcast where we speak with business leaders and entrepreneurs about the challenges and issues that they are facing as they scale their business, how they face those issues, how they fix them so they can deliver the products and the services that their companies and their customers require. They're going to share with us their lessons learned and their best practices so that fellow entrepreneurs and fellow business leaders can become more operationally efficient and effective in their product development and project management processes. I'm Richard Brew. I am your host, and I welcome you to the podcast. My guest today is Mr. Wayne Cochran of R2M International in Orlando, Florida. It's an Orlando, Florida-based pallet pooling and logistics innovator that started in 1987. The company specializes in manufacturing durable, hygienic, composite block pallets embedded with LOT tracking technology for high-volume supply. Wayne has an electrical engineering degree from Missouri's University of Science and Technology and an MBA from Arizona State University's UP Carey School of Business. He is certified in negotiation and management from ISA from the Harvard School of Business and Law. His career has been focused on product development and manufacturing for companies such as Motorola, Intel, and Jabil. Collaborating with Tim Rowland of R2M Corporation, he started Badger Technologies to create an automated robotic robot for retail solutions. He was president of a consulting firm named Pomo Cocos that supported private equity firms on mergers, acquisitions, and operational improvements. Wayne, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad to have you here today, sir.
Rich, thank you for having me. I'm excited to start the conversation.
All right. Well, to get started, tell our listeners a little bit about your company, what you do, what your company is, what it does.
Sure. So our company is really about providing supply chain solutions, and we do that through our pallet pooling and leasing. And so what you have for anyone that needs a pallet, rather than buying it, what you'll do is we will either lease it over a period of time or you'll pay per use, just like a rental car. So it's service pallet as a use. That's what we do. And how we do that is that we manufacture and design a pallet with our partners, a composite pallet, and we use that pallet throughout multiple depots in the United States to be able to get the pallets to our customers in the most efficient manner possible.
So when you say pooling, you have, I guess, warehouses or centers around the United States where you actually stage these for your clients?
Absolutely. And so we manufacture, first thing I'll say is that we manufacture in the United States. And then we have a network throughout the entire United States where the pallets are then issued. And they put them closer to wherever the customer needs it in terms of optimizing, again, freight. The depots, they repair, they clean and sanitize pallets before going back out for the customer use.
And when you say leasing a pallet, it's like leasing a car when I go to the airport or you go to the airport. I mean, How does that work? Is it just a basic agreement, so many pallets for so much time they're going to be used and then they'll be returned to you in a certain condition?
Exactly. So people, again, we can talk about the benefits of that, but what is simple as they'll say, I need 50,000 pallets and I'll need it over 2 years. And I issue an invoice for so much a month. So it's truly a pay per use. And again, what's really important about that is that the customer is only paying for what they use. You don't have to go and spend an extraordinary amount of money on capital. So if you take a person or a customer like Walmart, who uses literally hundreds of millions of pallets a year, if they were to go buy all those pallets, they would have billions of dollars tied up in capital, right? And that's just the acquisition cost. That isn't even the hidden cost of managing the pallets, right? Which are numerous. So by paying for this, they can expense this. They only use it when they need it. There's nothing they can work with us for a short period of time or a long period.
And then, one of the things we talked earlier is, sometimes people don't think as a pallet as a strategic asset, which it is. So when you speak with your clients about what your company offers, how do you get the conversation So they understand this is a strategic asset in their business. It's not a pallet. It's doing something very functional for you.
Well, you said it right there at first. It's a conversation. The discussion has to go around how that pallet is actually used. And you start to sit down and you go through what are the financial models. Let's look at, we were just speaking about, let's take a Walmart or somebody else that's large and look at what a capital outlay would be versus leasing on a temporary basis. Then you look at all of the benefits of optimizing your supply chain with the pallet. The pallet dimensioning is critically important. Today, people are spending an incredible amount of money to automate warehouses. And that pallet and the ability to be able to interface with that in terms of a tight dimension, in terms of low profile, so that you can get more in a truck and you can get more in an automated storage and retrieval system. All of these things at the very basic level, support the whole supply chain that they have. And it's that recognition, really, the pallet is just one of these things that's the yeoman of the supply chain. No one really thinks about it, but everything that goes on a ship, everything that goes on a truck, in an airplane, it goes on a pallet. And if you start to think about the implications of that pallet in terms of the freight costs, the usage costs, the initial capital outlay, and then the sustainability elements and the environmental impact, it starts to become something more than just a pallet, right? It really becomes a part of their infrastructure.
And part of your infrastructure, from us talking earlier, you've moved your business from Mexico to the state of North Carolina. I'm sure that was no small decision, but what were your drivers behind that to bring it back to North Carolina, USA versus Mexico?
If we go to the beginning of 2025, there were two major things that I viewed for the company as potentially existential threats. The first, if you remember, in February 25, there were a host of tariffs that were initiated. And when you look at those tariffs, at the time we were manufacturing in Mexico, and the tariffs not only affected the pallet in its finished state going into the United States, but a lot of our material for that pallet was coming from China. And so the combination of these tariffs, both for the raw material and then the pallet going to the U.S., had me very, very concerned. So again, when you made the introduction, you talked about being in manufacturing and product development, basically my whole career. And so just like my manufacturing processes, when I think of the business, we try to remove variation to the greatest extent possible. And if you look back at 2025, in the 52 weeks of the year, I think there was 53 or 54 tariff changes over that period. So there was a massive instability. So I was looking at that and the economics of that. The second thing is what I was seeing is that the pallet itself, this was an opportunity. We'd been talking for a year and a half about a better pallet. Because we saw the automation coming, we saw the environmental elements that we wanted to make sure we had a completely recyclable pallet. We really wanted to focus on listening to our customers. They talked to us about even things like friction on fork tines and how we could optimize that, optimize the height of the pallet so that on the backhaul, if you're 5 inches and your competitor's 6, well, an inch doesn't sound like much. And so you start to stack it into a truck, and lo and behold, on a backhaul, you're getting 17% more pallets coming back. And that pallet, we knew that if we were to use composite materials rather than wood, we could build a pallet that's actually stronger than wood, way less. And so we looked at this and said, given the challenge that we have, and we're going to have to probably go to a new pallet anyway, this is time for us to go ahead and make this move out of Mexico and into the United States. And we expect to have 2 manufacturing sites in the United States, one in Michigan and then one in North Carolina.
When you started this process of coming from Mexico to the USA, I'm sure you did your due diligence to look at potential issues and challenges. Was there any issue or challenge that you encountered when you came back to the United States that you didn't account for, or that you sort of knew of, but you didn't think it was going to show its face, but it showed its face? Did you experience anything like that?
Yeah, anything. I was thinking about how many there were, but if I really say, all right, what were the ones that were really significant or impactful? And so the first one was, again, because of the nature of the timing, the challenge of moving assets from Mexico into the United States in terms of how to import that, cost to import that, et cetera, we knew it'd be difficult. It was more difficult than what we'd anticipated. And then immediately upon making the move, deciding to make the move, we had another set of challenges. And that was one of overall freight costs and overall, I'll call it material costs. Remember, if you take a look at in January, high density polyethylene, which is a major part of our product, was about 45 cents a pound. By May, it had climbed up to $1.05. So that volatility in the bill of material really threw us. We had to end up modifying the pallet's design, again, to optimize the composite. Means it's a composite of multiple materials. Really looking hard at the mix of those materials, again, to get our costs where they needed to be competitive. I mean, the pallet is not a smartphone. The pallet is not a Gucci product with huge margins. And so we needed to be really rigorous. So those are the two things that we had to face that really required us to back up and say, how are we going to manage this?
Okay. And then we did speak about pressures within the supply chain. So there's one of them, right? One of your raw material costs decides it wants to escalate on you. But are there other pressures within your supply chain as you're scaling this thing up that you're still dealing with?
Absolutely. Let's look at the more recent. Since COVID threw the supply chain on its ear. I mean, it impacted so many things, but I'm going to leave that, but I'll pull one attribute out that I think is important. When we came out of COVID, what we saw was there were many, many truck drivers that left through COVID and after COVID. So from a supply side of drivers and trucks, you already had a supply deficiency. You had lower than what we really needed coming out of the COVID years. Then there were policy issues that changed this year that impacted a number of drivers. So there were many tens of thousands of drivers that left. And the combination of that really left a supply side problem for freight. So unless you are one of the very biggest or you have your own freight and your drivers, now you have a supply side on freight that's making it very constrained and and inherently expensive. So your freight costs have gone up. Then we talked about, my polyethylene going up. Well, polyethylene went up because oil went up. And of course, now we know that diesel's high. So you've got a supply side where you've constrained on your drivers. The truck fleet is old, really needs to be replaced. And you have these huge diesel costs. So freight, which is a huge part of our business, right, is impactful. So we have the tariffs. I think, we've worked around a good bit. We focused hard on our supply chain to be able to get it as much as possible in the United States so it wouldn't be disrupted. But the freight issue is one that there definitely is, we're fighting that today. And I think we will for some time.
I think you're right until things calm down a bit with what's going on in the Middle East. And
absolutely,
we get a handle on that situation. Gas and fuel, diesel's all going to stay up there for a while. Let's talk a little bit about your approach. When you face these challenges or issues, what is your process? How do you go about addressing and fixing these things? Do you have a process that you've developed over the years? Say, this is how I'm going to approach these things.
Well, it's do I have one? Well, it's the one that I was blessed enough to get from working with great companies like Motorola, Intel, and about the plan, do, act, and then check on yourself. Basically, again, so when you're doing this, you sit down, like you said, what are you facing? And you're looking at everything that you think might happen, kind of a failure mode effect analysis type of thing. And you're looking for every element that could go wrong. And then what are the implications of that, right? And so you build that risk assessment. You put together the project plan to address or mitigate those things. There could be a couple ways. If it's kind of an if-then, if it goes this way, we'll go this way. If it goes this way, this way. And so that's the basis, right, from what you manage. But then it's like Mike Tyson says, you have a great plan until you get punched in the mouth. And And so then sometimes it's a scramble. I did not anticipate, nothing on our risk profile said that in a 5-month period, our material costs were basically going to more than double, right? So you have to scramble. But the method is basically that, to be very rigorous up front, do a tremendous amount of really thinking about what is everything that needs to happen, right? And then how to mitigate.
So it's putting, what I'm hearing is, one, having a plan, but part of that plan is risk mitigation too, planning known unknown risks and how you're going to do that and how you're going to handle those. When I talk to customers about risk, I say, if you know your risk, there's known and unknown risk, but whatever the risk is, there's a trigger. That's what you're really looking for, is what's the trigger? Because when that gets pulled, the risk becomes an issue. So very interesting. One of the things that I see affecting your industry is sustainability and emissions reporting as all businesses try to become more eco-friendly. How is that affecting your ability? What challenges is that presenting to you, and how do you just deal with those things?
Yeah, that's a great one. People have talked about sustainability and the impact of, for instance, emissions for a long time, but it's been more from a marketing standpoint. In other words, there's not been a lot of legislation. There's not been a lot of things that really have forced it. Now we're seeing initiatives out of the EU. California has SB 253 coming out. You've got things where we will have to talk to, or companies will have to talk to, what are their emissions? What are they annually? What does your carbon footprint look like? And that's why it's so important. I think when we talk about what we do, that information in terms of the pallet and what the pallet, how it ties into that in terms of its reusability. In fact that, the fact that it's lighter, you use less fuel to move it around, the fact that it's completely recyclable. These things will be not only helpful to these companies, but they'll be easily quantifiable. So when you ask what are the challenges in this, part of it is keeping in front of it to understand what really is it that I need to do, right? What is it that I need to have in place to be able to do the necessary, whatever it is, in terms of reporting, so that you're compliant with everything. And then say, okay, what is it that I need to have in place? And that's what we focus hard on, because again, we think we're part of that strategic solution in the supply chain to enable our customers to be able to support this better.
Are there specific emissions and sustainability regulations that are in place now with the government or state governments that you have to comply with?
Well, California is the biggest one that I'm looking at is California. Right now, because we've pivoted in our history, we're focused now more on North America. So even though we monitor the EU, because my view is a lot of times EU will be the leading indicator or something that someday will come here. For instance, fiberglass is not something that can be used in the landfill in the US, so we start to pivot and say, all right, at some point, that's going to be something we will need to deal with. How do we start to do it now?
And so not just emissions and sustainability, but you're in a very dynamic industry. Project yourself out 3 to 5 years from now. What do you think, besides sustainability and emissions control and all that, what do you see as the challenges that are down that turnpike that haven't shown up yet, but they're coming down that turnpike at you?
Well, again, it's going to be the first thing is ensuring that the product itself lives up to the fact that we can use it hundreds of times. And that's not just legend or wishful thinking. And so when we deploy it, is it going to be used as much as we think it will be? Secondarily, I think the big thing is around the communications, I'll call it the smart elements of our pallet. So today, a customer can say, look, I want to just track with RFID. And everybody will have all of our pallets have RFID in them. And so you can track that pallet, and understanding where that pallet is, whether it's, you track it as it goes into the truck, you're scanning it into the warehouse. So you have that location. I think increasingly, and we can talk about all the reasons why, the ability to geolocate and get parametric information from that pallet will be more important. So I think, we are positioning so that we'll have full GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and parametric information like temperature or shock that a customer could be able to use. So proactively, you've got analytics to be able to deal with things. Now, there's always this question of, as you said, what's going to happen in the future? How much will be on the truck versus how much in the pallet? And then how much of the pallet we need to talk to the truck. Then the second thing is, I think there's going to be a huge need in pharma and food. I mean, just think about the headlines today in terms of food and what's going on with whether it be bacteria or parasites. Wood is not there's no ability to sanitize wood. I mean, wood, and it just inherently, it absorbs water. And with that, you've got bacteria and everything that can occur. With our pallet, you don't have that. You're not going to get any water seepage. You have the ability to sanitize it. We do ATP tests. You don't have bacteria. I think that need for the ability to have in pharma and food pallets that you can trace what's happened so that people know from a food safety standpoint, what does that mean? That will become more.
So as you explain your technology, where your pallets are at any given point in time, but you talk about in the future, temperature, being able to not just figure out where that pallet is, but maybe what conditions that pallet is in at any given point in time. I'm taking one step further. Will your technology eventually be able to tell me what's on that pallet? In other words, I've got pharma or food or
Absolutely. I mean, you'll be able to tie that in. And let's just take, I don't know. I mean, I think a great example would be somebody like a Costco. So Costco is, I believe, and I hope I'm not wrong about this, but I believe that Costco is the largest procurer of wine in the United States. I mean, they buy more wine than anything else. Now we know that wine is sensitive to temperature and everything else, right? So you would be able to, Costco could buy the wine. They would know which wine is on that particular pallet. You'd have that linkage. You would be able to track the temperature of that wine through its entire journey. You would also be able to determine whether or not that wine faced a shock. So before that gets to your dock, if you looked and you said, wait a minute, my wine just got to 100 degrees, you may say, I don't even want to accept that lot, right? Or if it's shock that as you get it in, you put it in your warehouse, you go, oh my goodness, 10% of these bottles got broken. So there's that kind of information, not only knowing what's there and where it's at, but then the condition of it over this entire trip, right? So all of these things are going to make the supply chain smarter. It's going to make it more efficient. And that's what we're excited about.
So I know you can't give the secret sauce, but what type of this upfront work you're doing now to anticipate all of that? Is that more software development or hardware software combination? How do you prepare for what's coming down the pike?
Sure. And again, we, just like in our business plan, we have technology roadmaps, and then we have process maps that sit on top of that to support the technologies. And what we continue to do is monitor the next generation of where low energy Bluetooth is going, where Wi-Fi is going, and what's happening in GPS, and then what's happening in the networks, right? And so we partner with people that have many more resources than we do and are a lot smarter in that space to work on the developing a solution. So it's a combination, Rich, of both hardware and software that has to be in place. And then that's the first step. All of that data is great, but we know that, you have a lot of data and no information. And so then it's the aggregation of that into a dashboard working with the customer that is meaningful to them. Like the scenario I gave, how do they use that to manage proactively their supply chain and get the value out of it? So it's those two things.
And do you see any changes in the material technology that's going to drive the next generation? I'll call them smart pallet, if you will. Do you see different materials, different designs? Again, looking what's coming down the pike, what may have to change along those lines?
Absolutely. And when I talked about the technology, it's not just the technology of the electronics, it's exactly materials and material science. So the things that I see in a pallet, one of the things that we have to do is be fire retardant. So the material that we use and others use, the material that's there in terms of what we call intumescent, is it something that sits on top and causes it to char? And then what does that mean? So fire retardancy will be huge. And then as a subset of that, sometimes graphene is used in that. So materials like graphene that can be used to help in fire retardancy. Graphene could potentially also be used in making a pallet that its weight versus strength is optimized, right? And so there's going to be a couple things happen. One is a pallet is all about how strong is it versus how much does it weigh. And then there's the fire retardancy elements that we talked about, right? And so those materials absolutely are going to be coming into play over the next few years.
So if you look back on this whole journey that you've been on, and you're still on the journey, you're still constantly scaling. If you look back from the day you began your journey to where you are today, to what you're anticipating for tomorrow, would you do anything different in your journey that would have made life maybe a little bit easier for you, or would have increased cycle time to revenue? Is there anything you would have done differently along your journey so far?
The first one, I think, would be speed. We knew that we wanted to improve the pallet, but it was almost that, it was like, we've got something that works. The customer loves it. Do we change? So there's that trepidation in changing right now. On one hand, you could look at what we talked about in terms of the tariffs about, is that bad? But it also helped me kind of be a forcing function. I said, look, if I got this and I got this, if you're going to die, your fear starts to kind of go out the window, but I've got one solution. That's the way I'm going to go. And so, but if I would have liked to have started this much faster, because we are compressing what we need to do, if I would have started earlier, that would have been better for everyone. Secondarily, again, I think the analysis that we did in terms of, we did the risk assessment, but our ability to really understand the complexity of dispositioning the the factory in Mexico and all of the assets, and then moving everything over, was much more difficult than what we thought. And now, of course, we're talking about ramping a brand new product with new processes in 2 locations in the United States, right? And so by me compressing that's put more stress and strain on it. The last thing was one that was just, we were blind to, and that is some of our tools in the development of the pallet and its ability to model how the pallet performs in terms of with stresses and how much weight versus different materials were not adequate. And I was completely blind to that. I would use this tool in the past and it was sufficient. And in this case, it wasn't. And I had to just learn, wow, that was one of those, you really didn't know what you didn't know until you got into it and then got slapped in the head. So those, Rich, I think were the biggest ones.
Is there a nugget of truth or a nugget of advice that you would offer the folks listening today?
To do the one, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I agree. It's like you said, a pallet's not a pallet, it's an asset. And I think I deal a lot with small to medium-sized businesses, and they seem to get that a little bit more than the big Fortune 500s. They understand without people, we're nothing. We don't have all the resources of the big 500. So it comes down to, engage people. So I agree with you on that 100%.
In the group that we're talking about today, I think really, and it's painful, but spending that time up front, understanding all of your risks, and understand the implications as best as you can to go back and know, like you said, when the triggers occur. So you're not caught flat-footed going, what do we do now? And you've lost time. You've lost that runway. I think that's the one nugget I would offer today.
Excellent. Well, Wayne, I do very much appreciate you taking the time. I know you're on the road, but I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. I believe our audience will get a lot out of what you've discussed, especially on the challenges that you face and the challenges you see coming down the pike and how you're dealing with them. And so, again, I very much appreciate you spending your time with me and my audience today. So, ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Scale, Fix, Deliver podcast, and it's brought to you by True North PMP Consulting, a consulting agency that helps companies reduce cost, cycle time to revenue, risk, and waste so they can become more operationally efficient and effective in their product and project management. Again, thank you, audience, for attending today, and stay tuned for future upcoming podcasts. Good night.